Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast presented by Bee Culture. Beekeeping Today podcast is your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
And I'm Kim Flatham.
Hey, Jeff and Kim. Today's sponsor is Global Patties. They're a family-operated business that manufactures protein supplement patties for honeybees. It's a good time to think about honeybee nutrition. Feeding your hives protein supplement patties will ensure that they produce strong and healthy colonies by increasing brood production and overall honey flow. Now is a great time to consider what type of patty is right for your area and your honeybees. Global offers a variety of standard patties as well as custom patties to meet your needs. No matter where you are, Global is ready to serve you out of their manufacturing plants in Airdrie, Alberta, and in Butte, Montana, or from distribution depots across the continent. Visit them today at www.globalpatties.com.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. You know, each week we get to talk about how much we appreciate our sponsor support. They help make all of this happen and give us the ability to bring you each episode. With that, thanks to Bee Culture Magazine for continuing their presenting sponsorship of this podcast. Bee Culture has been the magazine for American beekeeping since 1873. Subscribe to Bee Culture today. We also want to thank 2 Million Blossoms as sponsor of this episode. 2 Million Blossoms is a quarterly magazine dedicated to protecting all pollinators. Learn more in our Season 2, Episode 9 podcast with editor Kirsten Trainer, and from visiting www.2millionblossoms.com, and that is with a number 2. And also, while you're out there, check out her new podcast, 2 Million Blossoms, the podcast, also available on the website or from wherever you download and listen to your podcast. All right, everybody, today we finish our 5-part series on hive types other than the standard Langstroth. That's a long sentence. Today we talk with Mike James of HyperHyves and the future, what we think might be the future of hives going forward. Kim, what do you think? This ought to be a good one.
Well, it's going to be good for a couple of reasons, because one of the things that he does is he's taken a look at a regular, what's the word I want, a regular cavity that bees would choose, a hollow tree, and he duplicates that in terms of insulation and all of those things, but then he adds the future to it. He takes all of these gadgets and adds them into and then has those gadgets talk to your computer or your cell phone, and then it chronicles the data that it collects, and so it's machine learning, as he puts it. And once it knows that when this and this and this happens, you can bet that your colony is going to do this, and it's going to tell you that before it happens. This is way cool.
Absolutely, it is. We wanted to end the series on something of where the direction is going, because I think early on we pointed out that the hive really hasn't changed much since 1850 something or other with the Langstroth hive. And so all the variants that we've talked about today, or in this series, has been some variation of the Langstroth hive, but not much change. The HyperHyve we thought might be a good example of where it all is all going, and so I'm excited to listen to Mike and what he has to give us here in this interview coming up.
Right. I am too.
Also, we know we've received a couple letters and emails from folks saying, what about the worry hive and what about this hive or different hive types? And obviously we weren't able to get everybody up here. And we did try to find someone in North America who had good experience with the worry hive, and we're unsuccessful. So maybe if a listener out there has that experience, let us know. Reach out to us at questions@beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. We would like to hear from you and have you on in a future episode to talk a little bit about that.
I can give you a hint, though, Jeff. The next book that I've got coming out, called Common Sense Natural Beekeeping, I did with a co-author who found somebody in the UK and interviewed them for that, talking about managing a worry hive. So, you may want to look there come this summer when the book comes out.
Yep. Speaking of books, Kim, what have you pulled off your bookshelf this week?
I've got a pile of books here you wouldn't believe. I got one on swarming, and I've got one on a new beginner's book by Charlotte Wiggins, A Beekeeper's Diary, and I've got a kid's book that I thought was really good. And can I tell you about it?
Yeah, and just a real quick, since you brought it up, we'll be talking to Charlotte Wiggins here in a couple episodes. So I'm glad you mentioned that book.
I wanted to get ahead of the curve on it with that. I wanted to get ahead of the curve with her on that, so that's why I've got it sitting here. But this kid's book is incredible. It's called The Secret Life of Bees, and I'm just going to read. I wrote a review for it that will be in Bee Culture, but I'm just going to read you parts of the review here to kind of give you a feel for how good this book is. The author is Mariah Butterfield, and the illustrator is Vivian Monaker, and the author is straightforward, no holds barred, good beekeeping facts. The illustrator is out of this world. The pictures in this book are and the layout and design, and there's only 48 pages, but on those 48 pages, every 2-page spread is essentially a chapter, and the 2 pages work together on every one of these. So I'll just read a little bit here. And the hero of the book is a bee called Buzzwing. And what you're going to do is follow Buzzwing, the honeybee, on an unforgettable journey as she reveals all the secrets of this busy, buzzing world. This delightful children's book has 22 stories that are each a 2-page spread, or maybe they could be chapters if you want to look at it that way. Each of these tell 22 different things about the secret life of bees. It begins with Buzzwing being born. And in 2 pages, the photos or the drawings follow her life from an egg to a larva to a worker bee who does the in-hive things to being a guard to finally being a forager. It shows all the life stages, and they're just easy to follow, and they're fun to look at. One of the things that they do in each one of these chapters is at the bottom of the second page, they always ask, can you find the 2 little rabbits hiding somewhere on this page, or the lizard, or the 2 mice, and so if you're a parent and you've got a child and you're reading this book together, it gives you an opportunity to be a pair, and it's really done well. There's also a lot of fables in this book. There's the bee tale from Greece, telling the bees, the poem, how that works. The boy who ate sky honey, and a bunch more. They're fables, and you know that they're fables, but they're illustrated well, and they do tell part of the story about what it's like to be a bee. There's more stories, of course. This is about the dance, the dance that bees do, swarming, the many thousands of other kinds of bees. What animals steal honey, besides beekeepers, of course, but it does talk about beekeepers and what they do and why bees and beekeepers get along or don't get along fairly well. It finishes with a page on how to be a honeybee's friend. And you should grow flowers, make seed bombs, leave sticks and scrap wood in a small pile in the garden for the bees who use that way to live, and certainly don't pick the flowers. Buzzwing closes by saying, bees make the world a sweeter place, so plant for us, grow the seeds, the plants and the trees, and we'll give you back a world of flowers and some golden honey. It's a great book, Jeff. If you got kids that are, I'm going to say, pre-kindergarten to probably about 3rd or 4th grade, this is a great way to talk about bees because the art is stunning and the information is excellent.
It sounds wonderful. It really does. I have some nieces and grandnieces and grandnephews that would be really target audience for this book.
Yep.
So real quickly, Kim, Honeybee Obscura is booming right along. What have you and Jim too been talking about in the latest episodes?
I don't know if you listen to night television at all. Stephen Colbert has a way of doing interviews sometimes that I enjoy his style. And he'll start an interview, apples or oranges? That's the question. So Jim and I kind of took that style and we adapted it to some of the things. Foundation, plastic or wax, and why. So we've gone over. We've already done one, and we're going to do several more on both of us being asked those kinds of questions, and both of us having to answer those kinds of questions, and we cheated a little bit because I told Jim what the question was going to be, and he told me what the question is going to be, but about 10 minutes before we did this, so you don't have a lot of time to think. It's kind of off the cuff, and it was fun to do, and I think you'll enjoy them.
Well, good. I look forward to hearing them. So everybody that Kim and Jim have the Honeybee Obscura podcast, www.honeybeeobscura.com. We encourage you to go out and give them a listen. They're short format podcast, 15 minutes max. So they're a great thing to listen to as you're getting ready in the morning, and you'll be done with it before you're done and heading out the door.
Good advice.
All right. Well, let's get ready for our interview with Mike James of HyperHyve. And but first, a quick word from our friends at Strong Microbials.
Hello, beekeepers. Your honeybees face a lot of challenges out there. Unbalanced food sources from monoculture crops, holding yards, drought, food shortages, antibiotics, pesticides, and pathogens like chalk brood. To overcome these challenges, your bees need the multiple bacteria that are in all nectars, pollens, and the environment. These bacteria aid honeybees' digestion and improve your honeybees' response and resilience to pesticides. Now you can help improve your honey colony health with a quick, easy, and safe-to-use product. Strong Microbials Super DFM Honeybee uses naturally occurring bacteria to restore the healthy gut biome of your honeybees. Check them out today at www.strongmicrobials.com.
And while you're there, sign up for Strong Microbials newsletter, The Hive, to receive exclusive offers and sales information. Welcome back, everybody. Sitting across the virtual table is Mike James, CEO of HyperHyve. Welcome, James, to the Beekeeping Today podcast.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Mike. Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too.
So we've been talking in the last couple of weeks now on the different hive types other than anything other than the Langstroth. And we picked hives that were fairly much anything you could buy from a local supplier, or there were plans to build yourself. We were intrigued by your HyperHyve, and I understand it's going to be released this spring yet, but it's really kind of the direction I think is really exciting because it's where the industry is going with the technology and our understanding of bees. And so that's why we've asked you to come in and kind of wrap up the series as the future of beehives in the year 2021.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to come on. I'm a longtime listener and honored to be invited to talk about it.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad you're here.
So the HyperHyve really kind of jumped out of nowhere for us. It kind of started in our backyard. I think like a lot of beekeepers, started with one or two hives. I'm from the sustainable building world with a background in some home automation stuff. And as a tinker, just kind of started to see that there really wasn't a current solution, or at least a kind of one-stop shop solution to beehives and technology within the industry currently. And so, I started looking at a couple studies where they had compared insulated hives with uninsulated hives, and the insulated hives appeared to perform better. There wasn't like really extensive studies on it, so we thought we'd just try it out. And right off the bat, we noticed that we started with package bees, really took off faster than our standard uninsulated Langstroth hives, which really got us kind of scratching our heads. And then as a technology guy myself, I really wanted to integrate some way of being able to monitor what was actually going on in the hive. There's some third-party products out there. We toyed around with some of those, but one thing led to another, and the HyperHyve just kind of slowly started to form itself to the point where I ended up filing a patent or application for patent. For right now, it's a provisional patent on integrated monitoring within the hive itself. And so we've been testing over the last year or so. Been building some minimal viable products, and we're to a point now where we think we're going to be able to hit a large production number with we're calling it the HH Pro 1 or Pro V1 as the beta model.
I know you're in Wisconsin, so an insulated hive makes a lot of sense for half the year, but you're seeing differences in the spring and summer with an insulated hive?
Yeah, so there's two studies that I found where they were showing even in the summer, like in Arizona, the bees are constantly, as you guys know, the bees are constantly heating and cooling the hive. And when they're doing that, they're not performing other duties. And so some side-by-side comparisons showed that the insulated hive just moderated that temperature change quite nicely. And the way I looked at it was, bees have evolved to survive in tree hollows, and trees, traditionally, like you look at an oak tree, for instance, and the trees that they choose are normally like 6 inches or thicker. And for each inch of wood, you have about an R1 or a 1R value of insulation within that tree. And then if you look at a 3/4 inch pine box, which is your traditional, your hive, you've only got a 0.75 R. And so even though in the wintertime, obviously, like you say, it's most beneficial, in the summertime, there's some added value as well because the bees aren't on HVAC duty all the time. There's only a few bees actually performing that task, while the others are, could be doing grooming activity, foraging, and so on and so forth.
Well, there's like styrofoam hives out there now, and I've used them over the years. The only downside that I've seen with those is the fact that they're big and bulky, and if you don't have 3 bricks on top of them, they'll blow away because there's no weight there. So, so yours is. I guess what I want to say is, how is yours insulated?
The exterior shell is going to be a polycarbonate, which is kind of like a fiberglass type plastic. And then there's sprayed foam within the interior, and then another plastic shell on the inside. It does add a little bit more weight. I don't know the numbers exactly off the top of my head, but they are about 10-15% heavier than your traditional Langstroth 3/4 inch pine.
Oh, okay.
So they're not horrible. Yeah, but the dimensions definitely are bigger. So we've got, it works out to be a little bit over 1.75 inches total wall thickness.
Wow.
Yeah. But it adds that R6 value, which is really close to a tree hollow that the bees would choose as a home.
So you're saying you're monitoring this. You've got some sort of thermal reading device, and it's sending a message somewhere. How does that work?
So having that insulation is really beneficial in regards to the monitoring. Just like our house, we're able to run conduits and pipes and wires throughout the house. Well, having an insulated hive now provides us all this room to put technology within the hive itself. And so weight is, so some of the sensors that are going to be on the hive itself is weight, internal temp and humidity, external temp and humidity, which also will call to a local weather station and can pull remote data too. And originally we were looking at potentially not providing an external temp and humidity because we can pull some of that information from like local weather stations. However, it doesn't show us the potential microclimates that each hive is experiencing. Some could be south-facing, some could be in the woods, so on and so forth. And so the data that it's relaying back to us might not necessarily be accurate in regards to what's really going on in that hive or at that hive location. But then we'll have a CO2 sensor in it. There's going to be a volatile organic compound sensor. We're not really doing anything with that currently, but it will be in the hive. And then there's a GPS unit, accelerometer. And then on some of the models, we're toying with this now. We're not really sure if it's going to come out in the first model, but it's going to be entrance control through actuators. So we'll be able to open and close the hive remotely. And then all this is powered with on the roof solar panels with a solar charger. And then it communicates through a cellular modem that we've partnered with Verizon on.
Wow.
So it's a mouthful. It's like a huge mouthful.
So it's coming to my cell phone or my computer at home.
Correct.
And it's continuous, or I have to call it up?
It reports based off a battery charge. It could report by the minute or 10 minutes. So then that gets stored on a database, and then you pull that information from the database when you log in.
Very nice.
Interesting.
You need to add a video camera to the front.
So ironically, that was the first thing that I did. I had so I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but Lego has a kind of like a robot tinkering set, and they've got.
You mean actually the Lego, the toy that you step on?
I'm not sponsored by them, I swear. But it's got a little camera that you can tie into. I want to say it's like Lego Storm or something like that, but it doesn't really matter. But the camera is called a Piximon. And so what I did was I took this Piximon, taped it onto the front of a paint stir stick, and then I hauled my computer out there, and I trained the Piximon to be able to track bees coming and going, kind of like the machine learning that you see like on some of the smart cars.
Yeah.
But by no ways am I comparing myself to those engineers. But the problem that I ran into was the power demand and the functionality on whether having this camera on it actually made sense. Because I think that we can get some of those metrics through the weight and through some of the temperature. So we were originally going to use it kind of for like swarming alert and to be able to count bees, because we thought, it'd be kind of cool to go, 250,000 bees left today and 248,000 came back. But it in practice, it didn't make as much sense to keep. It was kind of a cool thing to look at and to see. But I quickly scratched it off of the plan.
So you've got a solar panel on the roof.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
So is this whole hive one box, or can I add boxes to it?
So you can add boxes. So in the within the walls we have a bus system that communicates with each device based off of ID. And so when we build the box, we give those devices IDs. And so as you stack it, the hive knows what's on it. And so it can determine, as you're checking weight, you could go, okay, well, there's a honey super on there. Now we know how much that honey super weighs. We can deduct this. It's not like you just caught half of a swarm, but through that bus system, as you can lift it off exactly like you would lift a standard Langstroth hive apart. And in the patent design, the system interlocks, because as you know, like a Langstroth box, it's nearly impossible unless you're like my dad and line these things up just perfectly. They're almost impossible to line up. And so what I did was I designed an interlocking system where part of the internals come up and the outside shell actually goes over it. And so as you set them on, and I think you can see, we've got a drawing on our website that kind of shows you that a little bit of how that interlocking system works, because I think it's an expanded view. And then what it does is it connects through 4 pins, and those 4 pins then do all the magic between the boxes.
That's a standard, like a MAC address, essentially, from a networking standpoint.
Yeah, or like a node ID. And the communication that we use is through I2C or I2C.
Okay.
And so each board, when they come out, come with an ID, and we can change those as well. So, and I don't remember, it's in binary, so it's some ridiculous amount of serial numbers.
Yeah.
Better Bee is pleased to sponsor today's episode of Beekeeping Today podcast. For over 40 years, Better Bee has supplied beekeepers across the country with the tools, equipment, and knowledge needed to succeed. Because many Better Bee employees are beekeepers themselves, they understand your needs and challenges and are better prepared to answer your beekeeping questions. From their colorful catalog to their support of beekeeper educational activities, including this podcast, Better Bee truly lives up to their tagline of beekeepers serving beekeepers. See for yourself at betterbee.com.
I got to tell you, we've been talking to the people at the JPL lab that sent the machine to Mars, and they took a piece of fabric from the Wright brothers plane and put it on that helicopter that they sent up as sort of a neat thing to do. And we've been going back and forth with them. And you sound just like the guys at JPL.
I am no way. I could never work there. They're way smarter than I am.
Well, that's it. That's what it reminds me of. But lift and all of these things. So, I wanted to ask you. You've got something called hyperthermia treatment that comes with this, and tell me about that.
So when we came up with the name HyperHyve, I didn't even know what hyperthermia treatment was. Didn't even know it existed. And it just happened to be kind of happenstance that I stumbled upon. I think it was, once again, a study. I spend all night long in my bed before I fall asleep. I'm just reading study after study. I'm sure my wife is just confused how I'm so entertained by them. But I saw this hyperthermia and kind of started looking into it a little bit. And I don't know necessarily whether we will be providing it, to be honest. There's a lot of testing that we have to do. But the hive is going to be set up that we have the ability to plug in what's called we're calling it a hyperthermia board. And so on the base of the hive, there's pretty much a screen bottom board. So you can slide out that tray out of the back. But what we would be able to do is similar to the batteries that you see like on these drones that, you just snap them in there. You would ultimately have a bigger battery, because the hive doesn't really use a ton of power. But what it can do is it can act as a switch. And so you'd plug in this hyperthermia board. You'd plug a couple leads into the back of the hive itself. You'd go through onto your app or log in through the website. And what you do is say, I want to run a hyperthermia treatment tomorrow. And what it would do is it would heat up the box to approximately 105 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 hours. And that has, I think it's at those temperatures and at that duration, I think it's a 96% efficacy of mite control. The downfall is it potentially could damage the queen's sperm bank, which is obviously a major issue if that's what's going on. And so that's why we're not releasing it quite yet. We still have to do a little bit more work on our end to make sure that that's not happening. And if it is, determine whether or not it makes sense to recommend beekeepers cage their queen, overnight. But one of the additional benefits that heat is, well, I guess first, one of the cons to it is it messes up some of the foragers' sucrose responsiveness. And so, when the bees are out there foraging, they're not going to necessarily be going after the premium nectar. But the benefit is that their life expectancy, or those bees will live longer. And so in the study that I read, the swap kind of made a net zero difference. And so they were able to bring in more nectar versus their ability to bring in the premium nectar, if you will. But once again, that's, I probably went into that a little bit more than I should have, but but it's something that's on our radar, because, mites are obviously a problem, right? And the industry seems to be, and I'm really kind of surprised by it, is this: you've got this untreated, I guess there's kind of a gamut, right? You've got these heavy treatment folks that use chemicals and organic compounds, which I'm not necessarily saying I'm against. And then you've got the ones that just set it and forget it, and then the people in the middle. And so it's I've found it to be interesting conversations regarding treatment of mites.
Well, there is a unit on the market, I believe, that basically utilizes this heat treatment for, you said 3 hours. That sounds about right, up to a certain temperature, and you get a significant drop. I haven't heard much about it. It's not heavily promoted that I'm aware of. So this sounds like it might be something to chase eventually, anyway.
Yeah, and if I'm you may be thinking of the same one, but the one that I'm thinking of, it's a big box that you have to haul out to the field, which has its own issues, right? And then you're disassembling the hive and then putting each frame in there. It's just a lot of steps, right? And so I think if hyperthermia is going to make a splash, it needs to be easy. And one of the additional features to the hive that I didn't mention is all the sections have gaskets on them. So as the hive sits down on itself, it actually seals itself up, which gives us the ability to then use a lower heating or lower wattage heating device to provide that hyperthermia treatment effectively.
Yeah, I can see that if it's insulated and it's sealed, it would be much more efficient. Probably, maybe even a shorter time. But yeah, that makes perfect sense. I'm curious on the monitoring that you're doing, and why are you measuring CO2 and these other components in the hive, and what can you do with the information once you've gathered it?
So everything's data points. So the way that I saw it was the more data we can have, the better. The CO2 obviously I shouldn't say obviously. CO2 is a measurement that we take so that we can benchmark it against other data points and then cross-reference it to actual activity. And so when I started building the code for this, I started writing it in one code language, one that I knew quite a bit. Well, not quite a bit, but I knew how to code in that language. And I quickly realized that, as this thing developed on its own, might say organically developed, I quickly recognized that machine learning was going to be the key to the hive's success. Because it's great that if we can log in and we can see weight increases or decreases, what the temperature did, what it didn't. But if you don't know how those relate to what's going on in the hive, it's just a pretty graph. And so using machine learning to take those data points will eventually make the hive just smarter and smarter and smarter. And so throughout the activity on the app, or logging in, one of the things that we'll be doing is asking the beekeeper, what necessarily has been happening with that hive. And just like hive tracks of the world, you're keeping tabs on what's going on in that hive so that you can trigger future maintenance events and so on. But as they're doing that in the HyperHyve app, we'll be able to cross-reference data points historically. And so the machine learning will just eventually take in that data, figure out what kind of happened, and start creating more or less heat maps within the program. And so future events become more and more accurate to predict. And so we're hoping that, 3 years, 4 years down the road, the hive is 10 times smarter than it was when someone initially bought it, because we're able to cross-reference data to similar conditions in similar geographical locations with specific bee breeds. And that's where my head starts to hurt. Is I'm thinking, okay, someone's got a hive in Brazil, someone's got in Slovenia, someone has one in Arizona, someone has one in British Columbia. It's like, those metrics are going to potentially and likely mean a totally different, totally different output for that hive and what's happening. And so that's where the machine learning comes into play. So we can say, okay, with this general GPS location, we can kind of predict the weather climate, and then based on that weather climate, and you through the app, you said, well, we installed Carniolan bees in this hive. We can expect that a certain activity based off of the Carniolan's behavior, what does it mean? And so hopefully at some point, we're going to be able to alert people right on their phone and say, your hive is about to swarm.
That's where I'm going. Is your hive going to call you up and say, given this, and this, you're going to need to do this in the next 15 minutes.
We're hoping. We're hoping.
So does each HyperHive come with its own master beekeeper certificate?
No, it doesn't. I wouldn't even know what that's like. So I'm just a rookie. But the data doesn't lie, So if you don't have data, and that's where, even myself as a, quote unquote rookie beekeeper, sometimes I struggle with going, I'm a smart guy. I know what, for the most part, what's going on with the bees, but there's sometimes I'm just like, how did I miss this? They're gone. And by then it's too late. And, the way we see it is, there's another $130, $150 you have to invest again back into your hive because, the bees swarmed or time. And, what's your time worth?
So let's go back real quickly to the beginning or to the HyperHive sitting there in the yard. Can you describe it from bottom to top, what it looks like and the components of it? You don't need to go in great detail, but what are we looking at?
So on the base itself, you have, that is where the scale is. And then there are going to be two entrances that are split. And then that's where the actuators will go. And the reason we have two slots is so that you can put a divider board within the hive and split the hive into two nukes if you wanted. And then on top of that, you'll have your brood box, one or two, whichever, or three, whatever your management strategy is. And then you'll be able to snap into the inside a queen excluder. And then the queen excluder itself will have the temperature sensor in it. And that's so that we can get the temperature, it's the temperature and humidity. That's so that we can get that sensor right over the center of the hive versus on like a wall, which, is pretty important. The supers, as they go up, they don't really contain anything other than that bus. And then you've got the roof that sits on top of that. Currently we don't have an inner cover because there's it's not really a duct, but we'll call it a ducting system within the insulation of the top cover. And then there's a little adjustable vent on the front of the hive where you can open or close it depending on how much airflow you'd like in and out of there. And that'll be the first model. We're talking about potentially adding some brains to that ducting so that you don't have to manually open or close it. The hive can do it for you if you'd like.
Is this a telescoping outer cover?
It's not. So it does the interlocking similar to all the boxes.
Okay.
And so you've got approximately about 3 inches of roof that interlocks right onto the top of a super or the brood box if you're in that situation. And then there's it's a sloped roof with a aluminum composite, then is sloped with a ridge cap on it, and then the solar panels are glued onto both sides of the or fixed, I should say, onto both sides of that aluminum composite.
When people go to your website, and there's a link on your website, I think off the top of the page that says what is the HyperHive, and when you click on that, you come up with a drawing. And now I understand what I'm looking at. I'm looking at the bottom, and then I'm looking at the top. Is that correct? You know the drawing I'm referring to?
Yep, that's it. So that's the CAD drawing.
I'm looking at the top, which goes on the top of the hive, no matter how many brood boxes and honey supers are below it. And then the bottom is the scale and the double entrance and all of the other machinery that goes with the bottom. Okay, well, now I know what it looks like. I was confused when I first looked at it, but when you see it, now you'll recognize it when you take a look. You're looking at the bottom and the top and none of the boxes in between.
Yeah, and we tried to keep it, not as close. I mean, obviously the Langstroth inspired it, but we made some updates primarily with the interlocking, and then there's no telescoping cover. And so you're still going to have the ability to feed bees if you do it with like a bucket or a frame. Obviously, a frame feeder would probably be the easiest way to feed the bees.
And all my frames from my other hives are going to fit. I can interchange them at will. Good.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And it's a 10 frame? 10
frame.
Design?
Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We're thinking of potentially doing an 8, but it's going to be 10 probably for the first year anyways.
Well, us old people would have appreciated 8. But...
I know. I knew you'd say that.
But I guess I can live with 10 that's this smart. I'm impressed.
Another question is on the joints of the overlapping sections between supers. How hard is that going to be to separate those?
Yeah, so one of the things that we saw is because it's gasketed, we don't see as much propolis buildup. However, on the backs, fronts, and the sides, you still have direct access into the hive like you normally would, other than there's a gasket in there. So you wouldn't want to like jam your tool in there. The gasket's offset, an inch or two. So you could stick your tool in there, give it a turn, and it would pop it.
And last question, just because it's topical these days, the interior wall of the HyperHyve, is it roughed up so they'll collect propolis? I mean, for the natural beekeeper-minded person?
Yeah, it's not as roughed up as a natural beekeeper would like, but it does have a rougher structure. And so these are some of the things that we've talked about and thought through. We're potentially going to be adding another device that we could put into it or coat the inside of the hive for those people, but currently we won't. First product won't have that.
Okay.
Well, you said the first edition won't have that. When will the first edition be ready?
So we're looking to launch the Kickstarter campaign here in the end of May. And we're hoping to get hives on trucks, July. And so it really depends on how well the Kickstarter goes. But, we're dedicated to getting product to the people that want it this summer.
So we'll have the links to your website in the show notes. And if all goes according to plan, your plans and our plans, this should be coming out about the same time as the Kickstarter's launched. So I encourage anybody who's interested in the HyperHyve or learning more to go out to your website first. And then if you're interested in jumping on the Kickstarter, definitely check on that date.
Yeah, and we'll have on the website, we're offering for anyone that signs up for the newsletter, which will give all the information on the Kickstarter launch. You can also sign up for some additional benefits. I think right now we're offering lifetime of free monitoring for the hive itself, which is a pretty big deal because we're looking at a monthly access fee for the app after that.
So the $1 million question is, what is the projected price or price range for a HyperHyve?
So I've never really answered this question, but we are shooting for somewhere between $800 and $950 per unit, and that'll come with the base and a brood box and a honey super, and then the roof, and then all of the tech within it.
Okay. Well, all that's going to be on the webpage, right, Jeff?
Yeah, you bet. Well, not the pricing, of course, but yeah, we'll have links to Mike's HyperHyve on our website and maybe a picture or two, but obviously the source for the latest information would be the HyperHyve website. And that's hyper, HyperHyve.com.
Yep.
Well, Mike, have we missed anything? Is there something that you think stands out that we haven't addressed well enough?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's, the system, I guess, is engineered, and this is the salesman part of me, but we feel that based off of survival of bees, honey yield potential increase with the insulated hive, that the actual cost of ownership is actually very low compared to a traditional hive, primarily because of those reasons. And so we've modeled out, I think it's a 3-year difference between some of the more popular brands and standard equipment. And we feel pretty good about where it's at. And we think it adds a great benefit to beekeepers that are wanting to add a little bit of tech into their hives.
And you reduce winter losses and summer losses and swarming and that. And it very rapidly you can see that it begins to pay for itself. So
correct.
Well, Mike, this has been fun. I'm looking for my trial copy, all right?
I'll send the first ones your way.
Very good.
So anything else, Jeff?
No, I'm good. I'm looking forward to the launch. I'm looking forward to hearing about the HyperHyve and having you back on a future show to tell us how it's going.
Yeah, that would be good.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Mike, for joining us.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah,
It was
thank
fun.
you. Enjoyed it.
All right.
Yes, thank you.
You know, this has been one fun series, and to end it on the HyperHyve is a good thing.
Yeah, I think so. It kind of took us the whole trip from something like the top bar hive, which is fairly basic, and I'm not going to say primitive, but certainly really basic, to something that I'm pretty sure that is going to go to the moon someday soon. I'm impressed with I'm impressed when people who have those sorts of skills apply them to something as fundamental as keeping bees, and how much better it could make keeping bees. I'd like to hope that all of these people that we've talked to over the years that have electronics in their hive, it's going to make keeping bees better for us.
Yeah. I mean, part of me, the geeky part of me, really is intrigued by the technology. I mean, you know me well enough to know that. But the other part of me just likes going out and then just looking at the hive and not even thinking about technology. So I'm a little schizophrenic on the idea, but yeah. Overall, though, sitting here when I'm working, it's nice to call up a window and go out to a website and see how the hive is doing. Oh yeah, the temperature's right at the brood level, and so I know the queen's laying and everyone's healthy at least 21 days ago or something.
Yep.
It's.
Yep. Well, it's nice to be in the world when this is happening.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's helicopters flying on Mars, and your HyperHyve is going to be calling you to tell you it's time to change the papers or something.
Yep. That's okay. I can deal with that.
Yeah, me too. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download and stream this show. Your vote really does help other beekeepers find us quicker. And even better, write a review and let other beekeepers looking for a new podcast know what you like. You can get there directly from our website by clicking on reviews along the top of any web page. As always, we thank Bee Culture, the magazine for American beekeeping, for their continued support of Beekeeping Today podcast. We want to thank our regular episode sponsor, Global Patties. Check them out at www.globalpatties.com. We also want to thank Strong Microbials for their support of the podcast. Check out their probiotic line at www.strongmicrobials.com. We want to thank Better Bee, our latest sponsor. Check out all their beekeeping supplies at www.betterbee.com. And finally, and most importantly, and I really mean that, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on this show. Feel free to send us questions and comments at questions@beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Kim, anything else?
No, Jeff, I think that about wraps it up. I like the thing about questions. Send us your questions.
Yeah, we're getting them, and we read everyone, and we try to reply to everyone. May not be timely, but we try to get back to you. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Take it easy.